Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Designing a Wash Pack Station with Produce Safety in Mind. My name is Galen Van Horn with the WSDA Regional Markets Program. I'm joined by my colleague. Karen, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, Karen Ullman, WSDA Produce Safety Program, Assistant Program Manager. Happy to be here.
And a note para español, haga clic en el globo. Okay, and so let's jump into it. Like I said, you all will have access to these slides afterwards. So, take notes as you want and need to, but know that you'll have access to all the information afterwards, and especially all of the links. We have a lot of links to resources that we are happy to share through this presentation. So you don't need to worry about clicking through all the QR codes in the presentation. Okay, so first off, why care about produce safety at all? Is this something just extra that is just a regulatory burden? Well, and that is one perspective, but what we're hearing from where we're working with lots of different farms at different scales is that actually a lot of this is coming from buyer demand for food safety assurance. There's been a lot of high profile illnesses from produce pathogens. And so buyers are wanting to see more standard operating practices and food safety practices. So buyer demand, also just managing business risk. It costs a lot of money to have to deal with a food safety outbreak. And so that's one of the goals of today, is to make it straightforward and relatively easy to assess where you can invest your money and manage risk in your business effectively. There are some updates to regulatory requirements that have happened in the last 10 years. And so the link that we've referenced here is the WSDA Bridging the Gaps Farm Guide, available in English and Spanish. And that has all of the detailed information about regulatory requirements. So we're not going to dive deep into that in this presentation. This is going to be more practical, related to designing a wash pack. But definitely go to that Bridging the Gaps guide for as a primary source. It's designed with producers in mind, so it's accessible. And all of that together just reduces stress. And farmers and producers have enough on your plate. Finding ways to reduce stress is a really big benefit. Also, there is the link to the Produce Safety Program too. They have additional resources beyond the Bridging the Gaps Farm Guide, stuff that you can print off and hang up in your wash pack in multiple languages as well. Okay, so our agenda today has kind of four main parts: understanding wash pack zones, understanding hygienic design, which is basically just how hard is it to clean, and then designing for flow of people, produce, water, and waste, and finally writing a standard operating procedure. And on the right there, we have a photo of a beautiful wash pack station. Okay. We will have points in between each section for people to put questions in the chat. And depending on how we're doing with time, we may move quickly through those questions. And but if there's anything that's confusing in any section that you want to have clarified, definitely put it into the chat, which is a little button on your Zoom client where you can access the chat and open it and then see what other people are saying too. If you just want to read what other people are saying, I recommend opening the chat. Okay, so zones, wash pack station zones. So we're looking at a diagram of a mid-size packing operations, maybe bigger than a lot of folks in the room, bringing in what look like winter squash from the field. And this image is borrowed from University of Cornell, who have a lot of, and then just in general, we're drawing from presentations and products from a lot of, and publications from a lot of different university extension programs, Vermont, Minnesota, and Washington. So shout out to our shared investment in extension programs. So we see a tractor pulling up there, dropping off those squash. The product, which actually then looks like their squash is the second one. Maybe the product on the online is maybe a melon. And then it's going through a wash pack line. It's going to like a packing, sorting and packing section. It's being loaded up on pallets, palletized, and then loaded up onto a truck. Okay, so zone one in here are the direct food contact surfaces. So the boxes that the food is loaded into the field, the actual line conveyor belt that the food is sitting on, and the walls that maybe it bumps into, and then the boxes that the produce is put in for delivery to market. This is obviously your most uh, the riskiest zone where there's the highest chance of introducing a pathogen to the food before it goes to market. So that's kind of the zones go from 1 to 4, from highest risk to lowest risk, and just different considerations too for how to manage the risk. So zone 2 would be non-food contact surfaces that are near the product. So any kind of walls or storage that sits above where the product is stored. Or in this example, the machinery in the washback equipment that is above the line as it moves through. So kind of another deeper example picture here is like if any spray nozzles or brushes or anything on the inside of that machine. And if you just have a hose with a spray gun as your wash pack, then the spray gun would be a zone 2 surface. So it's not a food contact surface, but it's very near. And the spray nozzle, the water is actually um, can be a point of transmission from the spray nozzle, if there's any pathogens collecting there, to the food. Zone 3 are just kind of other areas in the packing area. So ones to call out are any coal bins. So right next to the person loading onto the line, there's that coal bucket where they're pulling out a product that's unsuitable for market. Any drains, so the floor drain there. And then like pallets underneath where maybe some pests or could set up shop. And then zone 4 are other areas outside the packing area. So loading zones and unloading zones most typically, but depending on kind of what's around your packing area, there might be other areas that are outside. We're typically thinking about where wastewater is drained to, or where product like discarded product coal bins are dumped. Making sure that's not too close to where food is stored or cleaned. So in summary, we're really wanting to focus, everyone should be focusing their attention first on zones 1 and 2 and bringing those up, bringing the standard of cleanliness up on those zones. And then the other areas are all for good consideration too. There may be some areas to improve food safety there, which we're going to get into in a little bit. Okay, that's zones. So really quick, any questions about wash pack zones in the chat? And then I'm going to move on to hygienic design.
No questions in the chat so far.
I'll give folks just a little bit of time to type. Okay, I'm going to move us forward. I wasn't expecting questions from the wash pack zones. This is pretty straightforward, but it all leads up into There's a lot of moving pieces with a wash pack station. Okay, so the next section is what hygienic design. So we want to be in wash packs, we want to be examining all surfaces for hygienic design, which is a very complicated sounding word that probably took a long time to and a lot of money to come up with that word. But it's essentially how hard is it to clean? Are there nooks and crannies that may result in water, soil, or pathogens being collected? Can you wash all the interior surfaces with an appropriate detergent? These are the types of questions that come up in a hygienic design. Um, and for this presentation, we're dividing it into 4 sections. So is it visible and reachable, smooth and cleanable? Are there no collection points? And are you able to disassemble it? So we'll go through examples of all of these next. So first up, visible and reachable. If you can't see it, you can't clean it. Um, so this doesn't mean the surface must always be accessible. The photo on the left is another mechanical washing line, a pretty nice piece of equipment, honestly, that allows for deeper cleaning of the water basins underneath with kind of a lift, a hydraulic lift. Um, and uh, so being able to move something or shift it around so that you can clean in different areas regularly is just a big part of hygienic design. It's more of the passive. Um, uh, if it becomes difficult to get to a place, you're less likely to clean it, and your staff are less likely to clean it. Um, And then the picture on the right we see is probably looks like a barrel washer. And there's some intentional collection points for water underneath and then a drain. But we see rust spots. There are evidence there that's not draining completely or it's not drying completely between uses. Um, and so maybe that's something that people aren't noticing. They're not seeing that. This is actually probably a sign that there needs to be a modification to this equipment. Um, and I also just wanted to add this to the slide here because, these are examples of equipment that are pretty good investment for a small mid-sized operation. And so when considering an investment in a larger piece of equipment like this, if you're looking on the used market, there's often equipment like this on the used market. Be on the lookout for rust like this. That may be a sign of improper care or even a design flaw that you'll need to work out. Um, yeah. So moving on. So just because something is hard to reach doesn't mean it's not cleanable. Maybe you just need the right tool. So a variety of cleaning tools can be used to easily reach and completely clean different equipment and spaces. So this could include scrubbers with different handle lengths, different shaped brush heads, and in the picture here, actually, you can see with the little red handle, and there are telescopic inspection mirrors that are pretty inexpensive. Those can be really nice to help you see underneath equipment easily and quickly. Um, and then just one other note on brush selection. There is a kind of a newer type of brush. The technical term is a fully molded brush. I'll just put that in the chat really quick. Fully molded. Um, but no one really sells it as a fully molded brush. What you see is FDA compliant is how sellers market this type of brush. It just has fewer collection points for pathogens, and the brush itself is easier to clean and sanitize. So that's just something to be on the lookout for. Okay, next up is smooth and cleanable. So the materials used in the construction of equipment need to be compatible with the product handled and also the cleaning and sanitizing procedure used. So appropriate materials are generally smooth, durable, corrosion resistant, and impermeable to water. So this generally favors stainless steels and food grade plastics since these materials have been developed specifically for this type of use. Um, wood can be used, but it should only be used in areas that have time to dry between uses, to fully dry in order to prevent the spread of pathogens. Things like carpet definitely should be avoided, and especially in areas that might stay wet. These kind of incompatible materials that will also just degrade more quickly due to like staying wet and having nicks, cracks, corrosion, and other wear. So it may be a cheap upfront investment, but in the long term, you might end up having to replace it more often, and so you might actually not. It might end up being more expensive anyway. In the top photo here, we see a washing station that uses a wood frame with what's called plastic bench top on the left here. That's the for spraying, and then on the right they have plastic bins for dunking. The source here includes instructions and a budget to build these. And a note again, I'll share all of these slides with everyone just after the presentation. So no need to be scanning every single QR code. Those are there for folks in the future watching this video. In the bottom, we see a more typical wood frame with wire mesh for spraying. In this setup, they're using the plastic bins, though, to keep the product off of the wire mesh spray table and moving it through their line. They even have there, you can see a little metal colander that they use maybe for some smaller products or more sensitive products that they want to take good care of. So time for our first and only pop quiz of the workshop. So in this bottom picture example, where the product is handled entirely in the plastic bins, what zone would the wire mesh spray table be?
Zone color.
And go ahead and put your answer in the chat. Zone 1 or 2 for the wire mesh.
Ben from Sakura. Samsara, sorry. Yeah, actually, I ended up speaking with one of your
Oh,
cohort.
can we get someone to mute that
Uh,
person?
I have a farm up in Washoe.
Hey, Ben, you're not muted. Thank you. All right, we're getting some answers in the chat, a lot of ones. Oh, Bonnie says 2. So this is a kind of a bit of a trick question because most people do dump out their product onto these mesh spray tables. If you're dumping out your product onto the table, it would definitely be a zone 1 because your food is coming into contact with it. But if you wanted to start a new process where you're having keeping the product in some plastic bins, spraying it in the bin on top of the mesh table, the product is not technically touching the mesh table. So that would be a zone 2 then.
But then Merritt wanted us to watch for.
Um, and you could have a process then where you sanitize the bins and then you have immediately increased your hygienic design because you have just fewer pieces that need to be cleaned and sanitized. Okay. Next up, no collection points. So we want to avoid places where water, pieces of product, or pathogens can collect, and especially where they're difficult to clean. This can lead to cross-contamination between different batches of product, and it can also lead to premature corrosion and rot of your equipment and materials. So this includes like niches or sandwich joints. On the picture on the left, we see a sandwich joint, which are common where two surfaces are brought together in the assembly and they're not completely sealed. So there's a weld at the bottom and a weld at the top. And then in the middle, there's just a place where a narrow collection point results. Oh, someone clicking through my slides. I think I accidentally did that. Sorry, everyone. Oh my goodness.
I was gonna say, I'm innocent, Galen.
What the heck just happened? Resharing. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so then on the right, so floors are another common collection point, especially in spaces that don't have washable floors and dedicated floor drains. So we see decking as the floor in the example on the right. And importantly here, the sink in this example is plumbed and the plumbing drains away from the building. So there is minimal collection of water under the deck. It's just the spray from the wash process that maybe kind of collects a little bit, and then it's able to dry fully in between uses. Um, so that's a totally usable floor surface. You just want to make sure that if you are using wood, be sure to apply an appropriate sealant to protect it from moisture damage in the long term. Okay. Finally, able to disassemble. So cleaning procedures may require partial disassembly of equipment for adequate cleaning of food contact surfaces. It may be possible to even just replace existing nuts and bolts on any equipment with tool-free fasteners. So wing nuts, where you can kind of use your fingers to undo a nut, or they even make kind of what are called cam locks, and those are easier to remove or operate and without requiring tools. So you'll be more likely to do it. Um, and So the example on the top here is a do-it-yourself salad spinner using a washing machine. We see that they've made some modifications there so that they can uh, add probably a plastic insert basket with their greens, and then the orange little hose around the top outside. It kind of covers that sharp lip. Um, but is it easy to disassemble and clean? And uh, so it looks like it would be pretty difficult, and then you'd have to redo some of your work with those zip ties. Um, and so the link here has a ton of information on green spinners for farm use. Um, there are a lot of uh, dedicated equipment, green spinners equipment that you can just buy off of the shelf that are designed with this assembly in mind, that aren't actually that expensive now compared to these washing machine examples. So um, thinking about how hard it is to disassemble, and especially for a piece of equipment like this, it will be an important consideration for what makes sense for your farm operation. And then there will always be things that just can't be disassembled. For example, your floors and your walls. So the photo on the bottom shows how to improve cleanability of the floor or wall joint, which is a place where pathogens can often collect, can stay dark, and just things always get pushed off into the wall. So on the left, you see what's called a cove. That's a piece of flexible rubber that can be retrofitted into an existing frame structure to make a seal between the floor and the wall joint. And then on the right, you see an example of a curb, which is a piece of concrete uh, uh, flooring. And so this would happen. This is not a retrofit. This would be considered when pouring a new floor and framing a new building. But that creates a cleanable surface from the floor and then up a little bit onto the wall. Um, okay, so that is all of our slides. Then we just have some cleaning and sanitizing tips here for you. So kind of in summary, clean and sanitize food contact surfaces. So zone one. So that's soap, water, and then also an appropriate antimicrobial sanitizer. Uh, Second, schedule cleaning by item and frequency of use. So be thinking about, which items do you use a lot, and, matching the use to the cleaning schedule. Next, color code cleaning tools according to zones. So zone one maybe is all yellow, maybe zone two is all red, and zone three cleaning tools are all blue, for example. On that one, we recommend you have printed posters as a key for the colors, so that just tell anyone who's there, any kind of staff or anyone, what those colors mean. Store those brushes or cleaning materials in the location that they're used, and use colors consistently across your operation too. So if you have another area with cleaning equipment, try and make that the same color code. So you maybe will need to buy in batches, buy your cleaning brushes in batches so you can get enough of each color.
And you may already be doing it, right, with your harvest bins versus your packing bins. You may have one particular product for doing those separate activities that's already got a color system. So the more you can kind of stay consistent with that system, the easier it is just to communicate to other employees, hey, that's for that activity, and when we clean it, we use this process and dry it in this way. So that can come up in other areas of the operation too.
Good point. Thanks, Karen. For the periodically disassemble and deep clean equipment, this could be that could be an annual thing. But if you just get it on the calendar, it's part of your process, can be really, really helpful. And then documenting cleanings is so nice that, it can feel really good to just check it off of the list. And then that's also something that you can show to folks who are curious about your produce safety practices. You can show them, well, here's where we document all the cleanings for the annual cleanings for this big piece of equipment that we use regularly in our process. Okay, any questions about hygienic design in the chat?
Not so far.
I see.
Oh, we got one.
Yeah, I see. Gergo, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, asks, are DIY items allowed for use? And yeah, definitely. There's nothing is not allowed really. It's mostly about just controlling the risk of pathogens and collection points. And so using these hygienic design principles and these cleaning and sanitizing tips and applying them to a DIY operation is super common, actually, I would say.
Yeah, and there was one question about the machine that was used to rinse and clean early on with the image of the rusted item and what type of machine that was.
That looked like a barrel washer to me.
Barrel washer. Thank you.
Okay. All right, Karen, ready?
Yes, thanks, Galen. Yes. Okay, so in this section, we're going to be talking about flow. And we're going to be thinking across these 4 main categories. Because when it comes to post-harvest practices, it's really the point in the operation when we've got a lot of things going on. And to preserve food safety and quality, we're trying to minimize cross-contamination from sources of contamination, which could come from us transferring bacteria. It could come from water, which is a place that pathogens like to multiply and grow. And it could come from waste products. So at the end of the day, we're trying to protect the product. So we're trying to prevent contamination from the start. And so one way to get started with this just in general is to really just zoom out, take a big picture look at your operation, and start by mapping out the operation overall. One way to do this is to just pull up a Google satellite map and even just hand draw over that map or use computer software. What I like about this map in particular is that it's acknowledging where the property lines are. So it's clarifying where what's within their control. They're identifying, external impacts. So potentially the steep hillside. So things to consider is sloping and runoff issues from different activities right on the farm. They're looking at animals. So deer trails, so they know, okay, I've got a scenario of deer coming through typically from this direction. They're acknowledging adjacent land use. So this looks like it's outside of their property line where there may be some other farms doing organic orchard, pasture. Looks like cows are outside of their area too, but a potential impact. I also love how they're acknowledging things that aren't necessarily automatically seen in terms of water movement, and that's their buried water line, their septic tanks, their septic fields, and then where produce is grown, which is where we want to try to minimize animal impact, minimize runoff. We've got stack manure here, which makes sense because we're close to pigs and horses, but we've also got a garlic field here. So what are the ways that we're minimizing cross-contamination across here? And think of people as being one vector or item that can move pathogens from one area of the property to another. So good place to start is just zoom out. And now we're going to zoom in to the focus of the post-harvest activities. So starting with people, think about your operation and the different roles and activities that people play, particularly during the post-harvest process. How many people are involved in this piece? Is a harvest crew also your pack crew? Are there different activities that they're doing? Is one person focused on the washing? Is one person focused on the sorting? So in this top image, we maybe have a situation where everyone's got a specific role. So think about what that role is and how they're interacting and making sure they know their movement throughout the operation. We're trying to minimize cross-contamination, but also minimize backtracking and inefficiencies. So trying to move in a relatively linear fashion with the product through its process from, say, starting from a field harvested product that's maybe got soil on it to, if you're washing it, a cleaner product that then is going to market. Now, multiple staff employee situation might not be your circumstance. So maybe you're a one-person operation like in this lower picture. What I like here is this person is able to move around, pivot on their toes to get to different pieces of that process, effectively doing a very similar thing, but there's a lot less walking in between, right? So I'm imagining that they're starting out with product here in the bins, non-corrugated bins. I'm guessing those are probably their harvest bins that are then moving to a dunk tank area here. I like how they're keeping any of these food contact surface zone ones off the floor. I can see a colander here for maybe some of those last bits of lettuce that might be at the bottom of the barrel towards the end. We've got bigger strainers here, drying racks. And so she's able to pivot here from one to another, scale out the product, and put it into ultimately the shipping packing containers, which look like a reusable product. They're also in an enclosed environment, but an option to make it an open environment. And they've got controlled heating. So that makes sense if you're really looking to extend your operation into colder months. If you've got the fortune to be able to have an enclosed environment, that can be helpful for extending your activities. And it's also good for keeping out animals, for example. So I think this is a good starting example. I like how it's very modular as well. They've got these cinder blocks, so less bending over here into the dunk tank. And then we've got these moving wire carts, which creates some mobility for you. If you're starting out, you don't want to commit too much to a particular process. this gives some flexibility for you to figure out what's right until you fully commit to one particular way of doing something. Let's move on to looking at the product now. Product, people really, to me, go hand in hand. It was hard for me to think about those two things really even separately through the process. But let's just start here, thinking about even before the product gets into the operation, where are we staging that? That often can be something we're not thinking about as much because we're so focused on the product, but maybe there's a day of the week where you're harvesting a lot. Maybe it's the day before the CSA, maybe the day of the CSA, where you've got to get a lot of different products all together into singular boxes for your consumers. So thinking about staging even before you get into the area. Where would that be? Is there an option to keep it covered so we're minimizing birds from being over your bins here? Are we protecting the product from sun and heat? It could be tempting to put bins under a tree to keep it protected from heat, but then we do run some risk of animals and birds laying, nesting over the product. So be thinking about that staging and the volume of staging that you're going to be anticipating at its maximum level, and then you can work back from there. Let's take this a step further, thinking through the product cycle on the next slide, where, okay, so again here, bringing product in. I wanted to show this picture because I liked how this was more ergonomical, where they're not having to bend down as much. That trailer is at a higher height. It doesn't have any sides, which actually makes it just nice and easy to take and go. So this is probably a trailer that's used primarily, on the operation. It looks like they've been able to, get a product that they've been able to use for that. And then be thinking about the product, of course, through the wash pack process. What I like in the lower image is that it shows a really handy way that they've thought about stacking their packaging material to make it even easier to grab. It's keeping it off the ground in a unique way. When I look at this, it seems that they may have boxes for different markets potentially. So they maybe have different products coming into these different tanks, and then they're either mixing products to different markets, or maybe they're keeping different products in different bins for different market avenues, maybe based on the size of the product, grading, or other quality levels. And then don't forget about product that is waiting before it is then sold to market. So how can you make that process easier on yourself? In this image, they're putting plastic over the product if you've got any concerns about dripping condensation in your refrigeration storage, for example. This can do the service of protecting it. But then we've got just a simple piece of paper label on it, so we don't have to look under that plastic to figure out remind ourselves what that is. So that could be handy to communicate out. Okay, it could even say where that is going. If someone is doing the washing and someone else is doing the delivery, some written material to communicate where that product should be going can help minimize communication needs. If you're fortunate enough to have enough space to, and volume-wise, to add a forklift or other pushing machinery here for pallets, that can be great. But do think about the movability of those as well, giving yourself enough space to move around items such as that. So in this scenario, they actually added an additional pop-up tent, kind of like a carport. Carport can be an option too for covering that product without fully committing to an additional building facility. So let's talk about water and airflow. So water is a big topic regarding produce safety because it's used so many different, in so many different ways on the farm, and it is so fluid that it can really transfer pathogens. If you've got one contaminated summer squash, for example, and you're using dunk tank water, the potential for it to contaminate other products is higher risk in that scenario. So on water, we want it to be clean when we first use it, and we're going to try to keep it clean as reasonably possible throughout the post-harvest process. And when we think about discharge of that water, that's another key point too. So what I like about the image to the left is they've got a way to discharge from this equipment unit to an external source so that the gray water from that process isn't becoming a pooling water scenario in the actual wash pack area. Keeping things dry is another great way to minimize bacterial loads. So here in this example, to help make that process go more efficiently for areas that are hard to reach, for equipment that isn't super mobile to put outside to dry, for example, they've added just a little fan unit to help speed up that process in between cycles. Let's look at the next part. So another piece about minimizing that water buildup is to have really good drainage. So as much possible, we want to keep the water spillage in the area that we're doing that activity, and ideally having good drainage capacity. Also, the degree of the flooring here should move that water more naturally into those grades without creating a pooling water scenario. If that's not your scenario, maybe you have more of an outdoor situation. You know, that's okay. A lot of farms that we see are doing their washing of bins, etc., outside, perhaps with a power washer too. Just be considerate with power washers. Now we're getting some spray occurring. So we want to make sure product isn't really close to when we're doing the washing activities for that kind of level of cross-contamination. So outdoor environment is fine, a gravel pad, a driveway. If that's the scenario, always be mindful. Let's try to keep product off the ground as much as possible throughout that process and during the drying as well. So pallets can be a really great option, and a simple pop-up tent is great as well for any overhead concerns. Okay. And let's move on to waste. Okay, so waste, garbage, cold products can be an attractant for animals. So what we want to do is be removing waste as readily as needed for the level of waste that you're occurring. Maybe that's a daily activity. Maybe that's every couple of days. Just depends on your volume. I like here how they're protecting their waste area with an enclosed structure. Cold products, you might want to put into a compost pile. If you're interested in more compost resources, WSU has some really good links here for how to build your own compost pile, for example. So that's a great option for creating another alternative for your waste. Okay. Next. Okay, so here are just some examples of how to design the flow. It could be as simple as there's one entrance and one exit. We've got a rectangular wash pack facility. So we're going to go from wash to pack to cooling. In the wash area, that's where we want ideally drainage to go out and any cold and waste product. In a more detailed example on the next page, maybe you've got more space to do more. So you might be adding into the internal environment a landing product area, if that's possible. You may be adding in a more robust cooler system, for example. So be thinking about all these other details and space for movement of people in these spaces and not just the activities themselves. Say your situation is different. Maybe there's only one entrance or exit. So in that scenario, let's shape it as a U versus a linear. That's a great option as well. In a more detailed version of this, we may be able to break out more activities. To the extent we're able, it's good to section off with walls if possible. For example, the bathroom or areas where we've got plumbing. And that matches really hand in hand with washing produce plumbing, right? So that's nice. You can get all of that engineering together in one place. And then maybe in the far corner, that's where we'll have extra space for employee, break room, personal items, and then open floor plan here for the packing. 2 coolers could be really great if you've got different markets, you've got different products for different places, or you might want to use 1 cooler for staging, cooling the product before you move into the actual wash and pack of the produce itself. So that can be really handy if you've got the space. Let's take a look at a real life example. This is from a farm that I worked with. Offline here, they've got their cooler where they've got movement coming in. What I like is they've got some separation with break areas, storage, office, and they've got a separate entrance here for their drier packing materials. So they've got an area designated for packing boxes, for example. And this also just acknowledges the perfect scenario might not exist. So we've got both finished product and product to be packed in one space, and that just might be the reality of your space. But to the extent possible, they're really trying to move around here in a U-shaped fashion and semi-linear to make it flow nicely. And they've got different options here for when they use apples, they actually open this door and move through the space differently. So you might move through the space differently depending on the product and what kind of wash pack you're doing for that. So some tips. Mapping's great. If you're looking at adding more facilities, think about city and county rules and regulations. Consider for your present scenario, but also for your future. Be modular if it makes sense for you for now, and start small. Start with the highest priority. Focus on small wins. Maybe it's making it a little bit more ergonomical for your employees so they don't have to bend over as much. Make it easier to do the hard work that they're already doing, and the volume and your different markets. And as much as possible, when you're in the market for a new piece of equipment, do investigate the degree to which it can be disassembled and moved from a cleanability standpoint. Okay.
We did have one question in the chat. Is it better to have employee hand washing outside the wash pack area versus within? Karen, do you have thoughts on that?
Of anything, I would probably look, some things I would consider is maybe having a separate hand wash versus your wash pack, if you can make that happen, so that those activities aren't so commingled. We also talk about if you've got a porta potty situation, it can be nice to have the hand wash station, which could be just a mechanical foot situation, pump, for that to be outside the washer, so you can ensure people are washing their hands. And then I would look at the scenario in terms of just like drainage and plumbing and what makes most sense. So not a hard and fast rule on that.
Cool. And I'm going to move us along because we're running low on time. I can stay a little bit extra to ask questions, but I want to get us through all the slides and then we can stop the recording.
So just briefly, let's look at formalizing our processes. It's 3 parts: policies, procedures, and records. Policies, what do you do? A written description. Procedures, how do you do it? And the records are the log that it occurred. Let's look at examples.
We don't have to go so fast,
Your,
Kate.
okay. Your policy can say all food contact surface must be cleaned and sanitized. And if you remember from zone 1, this is really up to you to decide the frequency of that. So you decide how frequently.
Oh. Wow.
And so think through your zone 1. So think harvest bins, wash pack lines, and then your records associated with that would be the log of the cleaning bins. So when did that occur? Who did that activity? Similarly with a wash pack log. And then for your zone 3, not as intensive of cleaning and sanitizing and perhaps less frequently, but you can think through, okay, what are my zone 3s? Let's write out some SOPs for those particular areas. And for you, that might be the packing area in general, and then your vehicles and equipment. And so you can have an associated log with those.
And what does SOP stand for?
Standard operating procedure. So this would be at the high level, an example of an SOP. So it's going to have the basic functions of the purpose, what the task is about, the scope, who's responsible for this activity, what materials and equipment would you need, and then just a recipe, step-by-step instructions of what that activity would include. So for example, this would be an SOP for how to clean a harvest bin. So it would describe when this activity needs to occur, who's responsible for overseeing this and actually doing the work, materials, so all the materials that Galen talked about previously, and then step by step, which we don't need to dive into because there's lots of resources and examples out there that you can work from and modify. So here's an example of a record that I like. This is from that cherry farm packing, and they've been really explicit about what the tasks are. And then they've made their record modular in the sense that they know Wednesdays they don't do any wash packs, so they can actually gray that out. And then each week they decide, okay, well, they flex their packing day, so they might just cross out certain days that it didn't end up happening. So what's nice is that it makes it easy to make game day decisions within a week. Here's another example. Again, what I like about this is as far as zone 3 and 4, it's very explicit about the tasks that someone would need to look for, and then they can jot down any corrective actions that they may have addressed. So they may have noticed, okay, the fan does seem a little dusty. So this week they took the initiative to clean the fans. So that would be an example of a corrective action. I like how explicit this is so that people know what to be looking for in their role. And then one more example for your equipment and vehicle. Again, this is maybe zone 3, zone 4. The frequency of this may be a little bit more irregular. So they have this coding here that can describe, okay, this week I just did a general maintenance. I needed to look to make sure some nuts and bolts needed to be tightened on my tractor. So I made a note of that. Or maybe it's at the beginning of the season and I did a full deep clean of the tractor. And so I coded that and made a description. So this would be an example of your record. So if you wanted a more deep description of what that cleaning and sanitizing looked like, you could describe that and notate that out in a standard operating procedure.
Oh, we did it. Any questions in the chat before I stop the recording on just clarifying standard operating procedure? Okay. Well, I'm gonna stop our recording. Just got a few minutes left.